Hello, lovely people of the internet. It has been a hot second since I've sat down and wrapped up some reading, so let's do that. Hello, hi, welcome back to my channel. Today, I thought I should sit down and give you guys a little reading wrap up over the past few months. A little side note, little tangent. I think this year, at least based on the way my reading has gone so far, I think I will not be doing monthly reading wrap-ups. I think I will just be doing these kind of quarterly reading wrap-ups. Basically, so far this year I have read a total of 36 books. I've read 36 books so far in 2021 over January, February, and March. But the majority of the books that I have read have been for videos. Not all of those videos ended up happening, and that's fine. I'll talk about the books that I read for the videos that didn't actually end up happening and didn't see the light of day, but I still have read like majority of the books so far this year for YouTube, for this channel. And like in general, I don't like wrapping up talking about books in my wrap-ups that I've already talked about in other videos. I just think that's like just a little bit repetitive, and why talk about books that I've already talked about on this channel when I can talk about books that I haven't talked about? That's kind of what I want these wrap-ups to be. So the game plan for this year, I think, quarterly wrap-ups and just talking about the books that I haven't talked about already in videos. So while I've read almost 40 books so far this year, I'm not going to be talking about 40 books. I don't actually have that many books that I have to talk about for this wrap-up. Surprisingly, a lot of short stories. Let's start there. Basically, at the start of the year, I was mostly just making my way through these little Penguin classic short stories. I got these as a Christmas gift from my family. We do like a little Secret Santa kind of like Christmas bundle thing every year, and I got a whole stack of these babies. That was my Secret Santa gift. So I've been making my way through them. I still have one more left to read because I'm not gonna lie, I don't really like short stories, so it was a bit of a struggle to get through them. But let me just quickly tell you about these, what they were kind of about. This one is called A Simple Heart by Gustav Flobert. I'm probably saying that completely wrong. This is a short story about a lady and her parrot. I gave this 2 stars. Then we have Joseph Conrad's Typhoon. I gave this, I think, 2 stars, but honestly could be 1 star. This is about a boat that goes through a typhoon, and it was incredibly boring and awful. Gave it 2 stars, but could easily be a 1 star. Then we have my favorite one that I've read so far, The Death of Ivan Iliac by Leo Tolstoy. Surprisingly, this is just about a man dying. It's literally, it's just about the death of Ivan Iliac. I gave this 3 stars. Like, it was the best one of the short stories that I read, but it still like wasn't fantastic, but this has been my favorite so far. Then we have A Modern Detective by Gallampo. This is actually 2 short stories in one. These were fun, but not incredible. Also gave this 2 stars. And then we have Alexander Pushkins' The Queen of Spades, and I think I gave this 3 stars. I really like this. This is basically just about someone who likes to gamble. It's about gambling pretty much, and I thought this was pretty good, pretty fun. Even though those were all really short, that actually took me like most of January to read all of those short stories. Again, I don't really like short stories. I find them quite hard to get through, quite hard to be captivated by them. As I said, I still have 1 more from that like stack that I got for Christmas that I have to get through. I'm really not looking forward to it, I'm not gonna lie. I think I saved the worst for last. But once I've read it, I'll let you guys know what I thought of it. I doubt it'll be anything higher than a 3 star. Speaking of short stories, there are a few more short stories that I've read. I read 2 like smutty romance short stories. So the first one I read was The Roommate. Who was this by? This was by Brandy Bush, and basically this is about this girl who ends up going home for Christmas with her roommate and ends up catching feelings / being attracted to her roommate's parents. I gave this 2 stars basically because I felt that the end of the book, the last like 20-30%, was very unsatisfactory. I didn't like how it ended, but for a indie queer diverse smutty short story. I think it was pretty good. It's definitely smutty, very, very graphic, very NSFW if you're looking for something like that. Our main character is a person of color and plus size and queer, and then the two, like the parents of the roommate that she ends up like being attracted to are also people of color, and I guess queer as well, I suppose, because they end up having a threesome. So it was very, very quick, very easy to read. I gave it 2 stars just because personally wasn't a huge fan of the way the story was told, but for all intents and purposes, very, very good. If you're looking for more diverse kind of smutty romance, would definitely recommend this. And then another short kind of smutty romance story that I read was Go Deep by Rosie Adams. I picked this up because Talia Hibbert, who is one of my favorite romance authors, recommended this. She wrote a good review for this on Goodreads, I believe. And this is a short story about a woman who is a like smutty exotic fiction writer, and she's in a bit of a slump. She's lacking inspiration, so she asks to fuck her best friend, her guy best friend. They've been friends for like forever, literally forever, and she asks for him to help her out, give her some inspiration, get the juices flowing creatively and literally. And while this was like very smutty, very like sex-based, I did really like the friends to lovers relationship that was in this. This was very, very good. I gave this 3 stars. Definitely liked it, and I believe this is the first in a series, and I'm very, very interested in picking up the next one. This is also a diverse romance read. Not too sure if it is indie or traditionally published. I'm gonna guess indie. But would definitely recommend it as well. And while we're talking about romance, and while I've mentioned Talia Hibbert, I have been going through Talia Hibbert's backlist books, and I've been reading a bunch of them. The first one I read was Guarding Temptation. This is another short smutty story. This is very much a falling in love with like your brother's best friend kind of romance. So Nina is very political, and she runs this like blog where she talks about politics, and she ends up getting doxxed, is that what it's called? Basically people like are trying to find out where she lives and threatening to like come and, you know, hurt her, expose her, all this bad stuff. And so she goes and ends up staying with her brother's best friend, who we find that there has been like, they're both kind of been mutually pining for each other for quite some time. And so this is kind of like a friends to lovers situation as well. This was just super, super cute, super, super steamy. I gave this 4 stars. I absolutely loved it. Then I read The Princess Trap, and this is very, very, very fun. This is classic hooking up with someone, but turns out that they are secret royal, haha, and then oops, turns out we're having to be engaged, but don't worry, it's fake. It's just for the media's sake. But for all intents and purposes, we are engaged and you are set to be my wife. Just a glorious use of tropes. This was definitely a lot more fun than Guarding Temptation, like a lot more lighthearted, but still just really, really great. I loved both of the main characters, and it was so fun. If you like fanfiction, if you've ever read fanfiction, if you've ever enjoyed fanfiction, this is like high quality published romance that very much feels like fanfiction. It's great, would highly recommend. And then I read the first 2 books in the Ravenswood series by Talia Hibbert, the first one being A Girl Like Her. And this is about Ruth, who is a bit of a recluse. She doesn't really like leaving her house. She just stays in her apartment, and she works on a comic or a graphic novel online, but she gets a new neighbor, Evan. Evan is gorgeous and Evan is lovely, and Evan very much falls in love with Ruth, and Ruth very much falls in love with Evan, and it is great, and it is very, very sweet. And then the second book, Untouchable, follows Ruth's sister Hannah, and Hannah is hired to look after this guy's 2 kids. She becomes a live-in nanny, except unfortunately her boss Nate is really, really hot. He's a single dad, he's a widower, and he is also really, really lovely, and he also falls very, very much in love with Hannah, and Hannah also falls very, very much in love with Nate. This one I think was like a little bit, I didn't like it as much as A Girl Like Her, I don't think, because there was like the very weird dynamic where Hannah was employed by Nate, and that seemed to be like a really big issue for like all the other side characters in the story, Whereas with Nate and Hannah and their like romantic relationship, they were very clear that it was very separate from like the professional relationship, and also they had plans to like not really be together until Nate had found someone else to look after the kids. So they're trying really hard to like keep them separate, but everyone else in the story seemed to have like a really big issue with it, which is understandable. I understand like the dynamics, the power dynamics is like not very ethical, but I just felt like it felt very similar to like a miscommunication trope where like everyone else just didn't really get that they had realized that it wasn't necessarily the best situation to be like dating your boss / employee, and they were trying to fix that. Like they'd already addressed the problem and they were already like trying to fix it, but then everyone else kept like getting in the way and causing problems because they didn't know that. And that just kind of bugged me, I will say, but I still love this. I gave both of these 3 stars. Would highly recommend anything by Talia Hibbert. Haven't read all of her stuff, but it's all really, really great, or really, really fun, or really, really steamy. All of her characters are incredibly well developed, and I really like most of her books have like a serious kind of aspect to them. Whether that's plot-wise or character-wise, there's always just like a touch of reality that just makes the books so much better. Just highly recommend. Really, really great. She is probably my favorite romance author to date. I just love her stuff. Love it. While we're talking about romance, back in January there was the historical fiction romance readathon, and I tried to participate in this. I tried making a vlog. I didn't really end up vlogging. I actually didn't really end up participating that much in the readathon in general. I did kind of update on Instagram, so you might have seen the books that I'm going to talk about next, but let's talk about a few historical romances that I read. The first being A Rogue by Any Other Name by Sarah Mclean. This is the first in the Rules of Scoundrels series. This was the first Sarah Mclean book that I had ever read, and this follows the romance between Penelope and Bourne. Penelope and Bourne were childhood best friends, but in the like current day of the romance they haven't really seen each other for a very, very long time. Penelope is getting on the older side of things. She definitely should have been married by now in the day and age that this is set and for how old she is, and she's had a few like proposals but none that has ever really felt genuine to her, so she's turned them all down, which like logically back in that day, very, very bad move. Her parents are very, very worried that she is going to end up a spinster. They want her to be protected and married, so Penelope's dad ends up attaching this big like piece of land and estate onto Penelope's dowry, and this is like one of the nicest pieces of land wherever this is set. I want to say England, but I would have no idea. And Penelope's parents think that she will get a ton of proposals now that this like piece of estate is attached to her dowry. Penelope does not want this. Penelope has turned down all these engagements because she wants to be married for love. She wants to at least like the person who she's engaged to, and she would at least hope that the person who's proposing to her likes her as well. And this is where Bourne comes in, her old childhood friend. This piece of land, this piece of estate, used to be Bourne's. It used to belong to his family, and Bourne very stupidly lost it when he was a lot younger in a gambling game, and he's determined to get it back, and just so coincidentally means that he will have to get married to Penelope. So he proposes. I believe she says yes, but I don't think it's because she really wants to. And I believe it's kind of like an arranged engagement in the sense that they both get something out of it. But either way, kind of a friends to lovers, very much them reuniting now that they're older, not just as friends but also as lovers. This was fun, but it wasn't really like amazing, kind of forgettable. I gave it 3 stars. I enjoyed myself, but definitely not like the best historical romance I've ever read. The next historical romance I read was actually also a short story, and it's called A Little Light Mischief by Cad Sebastian. This is a queer historical romance. Not the first one I've ever read, but one of the few that I have, and while I really quite liked this, I wish it had been longer. I gave it 3 stars because it was very good, but if this had have been a full-length sized novel, absolutely would have loved it, would have given it a 4 or 5 stars. And the next book that I read for the historical romance readathon was A Notorious Vow by Joanna Schupp, and this was the group pick for the readathon, and I adored this so much. This was just the sweetest thing ever. So this follows Christina, whose family has just moved to America from London because her family is broke, bankrupt, like in lots and lots of debt, and her family are not very nice people, so they're running from their problems and they are hoping that they can marry Christina off to some rich American guy, take the money that she gets from the marriage and use it to get back to England and pay off all their debts. Christina is not really having the best time going around trying to find an American suitor, but she does end up meeting a very nice man who happens to be her neighbor called Oliver. And Oliver is one of my favorite historical romance heroes that I've ever read. This man's was just so sweet. Oliver is deaf, and so he very much keeps to himself in his house. He has a very select number of staff, and most of them know sign language, I believe. He doesn't have many friends. He doesn't ever really have any visitors. He just lives there with the staff and his dog. And one day he is very surprised to find that his dog has stumbled across a random strange lady and knocked her over and unconscious. So Oliver carries her up and takes her inside, makes sure she's okay, and that is the start of a very beautiful friendship, which then blossoms into an even more beautiful romance. And this book it makes your heart warm. It is just so sweet, and I don't think it was like the steamiest thing that I had ever read, but definitely there were some fun steamy scenes in there. This was also the first Joanna Schupp book that I had ever read, but I'm very excited to pick up more of her books if they're like this. Very satisfying read. Absolutely loved it. Gave it 4 stars. I should also quickly mention I did read books 2, 3, and 4 of the Bridgerton series in January by Julia Quinn. I read the first book last year. Did not like it at all. The Duke and I think it's called. Hated it. Ugh, 1 star rating from me for that. The next few books were better. I will give them that. Still kind of average, except for book 2. I really liked book 2. I gave book 2 4 stars. The Viscount Who Loved Me. This is Anthony's story. Anthony's the oldest Bridgerton child. And while I don't think the romance objectively was anything amazing or like spectacular, there were a few tropes in this book that are like my weakness, my all-time favorite tropes in a romance that I just loved about this. And so I had to give it 4 stars because it was just so great. Like, those tropes made this amazing for me. Don't think everyone else would really like love them. I don't think it would. I could see why a lot of people would just give this a 3 stars because it is, as I said, objectively not amazing. The books 3 and 4 of the Bridgerton series were like me. I gave them both 3 stars. Don't really want to talk about them too much because I don't feel like there is much to say. The next book that I want to talk about is Queen of Beauty by Paula Morris. This is a library book. I read this for my master's program that I'm currently doing. Paula Morris is a New Zealand writer, and I'm pretty sure she wrote this book either while she was studying for her master's / her PhD, or this was the first book that she published after studying. This is like her debut novel. I read this because I'm studying it, obviously. I don't think I would have picked this up otherwise. I didn't even really know that this book existed. Not mad that I did pick this up. I gave this 3 stars. Like, personally, enjoyment wise, it was fine. It's like literary fiction. It follows Virginia, and she is a researcher for an author in New Orleans, and she comes home for her sister's wedding. She comes home to New Zealand for her sister's wedding, and basically it's just about her 2 separate lives, but there are a lot of like really serious topics that are discussed in this. I probably cannot do it justice talking about it right now, just like in a wrap-up video. I will probably be reading this again sometime soon because I'm studying it, but I think Paula Morris is a very great writer. I think her writing style is amazing, and if anyone is looking for some very underrated New Zealand writing, maybe check this out. It was pretty good. I'll give it that. The next 2 books that I want to talk about were buddy reads that I did with my friend Kiva. We're kind of trying to buddy read a book every month. Kind of, almost. The first book we read was Pretty Girls by Karen Slaughter. This is like a mystery, thriller, horror kind of story. I really didn't like this. I think I liked the end. I think most of the book was a real drag, and then the ending was pretty exciting and pretty cool, but I gave this 2 stars. I just really didn't like anything about this book. It was like, I think the blurbs, like the way that it's written, the way that it is like sold. When I read the back, I thought this was about 2 sisters who had lost another sister because she's been taken, she's lost basically. And then other girls go missing, and it like brings up this trauma and this like past for these 2 sisters and brings them closer together. And that is kind of what happens. But this whole story is very centered around men, which isn't surprising at all, but it also wasn't what I was expecting. And at the time, I really didn't want to read about the trauma of women at the hands of men, because that's just like, it wasn't surprising to me that a man was the villain of the story, because men are villains in real life. Not to get political, but it just wasn't what I was expecting, not what I was wanting, and that really like just kind of ruined my reading experience, I think. Yeah, this just was like not what I was expecting at all, and I was very, very bored for a lot of it, because it, like, once I knew it was all about once I knew that men were the big bad, it was all very, very predictable and just not exciting at all. So gave that 2 stars. The next book that Kiva and I buddy read was Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This was also kind of not what I was expecting. This is like a young adult contemporary, but it's also kind of like a mystery thriller. Very, very serious. It is about a young singer called Enchanted, and we see her have this horrible relationship with an older famous singer, who takes like advantage of her and manipulates her and all this kind of stuff. Very, very, very serious story, which I wasn't expecting going in, but it wasn't a bad thing, I wouldn't say. I think this is a really, really great story. I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't like the best thing that I've ever read, but it was good. That was definitely better than Pretty Girls. I definitely liked Grown so much more. So much more. And then we're starting a new buddy read next week. So I haven't started reading that yet, so I can't talk about it, but I will talk about it in my next wrap up. And the last 2 books that I want to talk about were books that I read in March for Becca's Bookathon. This was a readathon that happened around halfway through March over the weekend. I was planning on vlogging, but that just didn't go according to plan at all, so I just ended up participating for fun. The first book I read for this was These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. This is a YA fantasy novel. This is Chloe Gong's debut novel, and this was incredible. Shakespeare fucking wishes. This is a Shakespeare retelling of Romeo and Juliet. It follows Roma and Juliet, but it is set in the 1920s in Shanghai, and it follows 2 opposing gangs kind of have to work together to kind of figure out these mysterious deaths that are happening in Shanghai at the moment. And there are rumors that the deaths are happening because of a monster, but if that is actually what happens or not, I'm not going to tell you. You're going to have to read it and find out, because I would highly recommend this book. It was incredible. Not only was the plot very, very fun, very, very gripping, but the enemies to lovers romance was incredible. I'm not a huge enemies to lovers fan. I know, scandalous, that is such a popular trope in the book community. And I'm not saying that I hate it. It's just like, it's just not my favorite. I don't have that burning passion for enemies to lovers that so many other people have. But I can appreciate a good enemies to lovers, and this is definitely a good enemies to lovers. Really, really great. Great. I gave this 4 stars, and I cannot wait for the sequel to come out. Literally cannot wait. I'm so very excited. And then the final book that I want to talk about, and the final book that I read for the Bookathon, was Girl Gone Viral by Alicia Rye. This is the 2nd book in the Modern Love trilogy or series. I think it might be a trilogy. I know there's a 3rd book out, which I'm very excited to read, but I don't know if it's the last one. Either way, this is the 2nd book in the Modern Love series, and this is kind of also like a friends to lovers romance, but also very much my bodyguard is a hot himbo hunk, and maybe I am actually attracted to him kind of romance. This follows Katrina, and basically because of some things that have happened in her past, she is very scared of basically everything. She doesn't really like leaving her house, and she is absolutely terrified of being recognized by people, being recognized online, anything like that. And unfortunately, at the start of this book, she is out at a cafe and this random guy like starts talking to her, and some of the people in the cafe take pictures of them talking and like spin this tale that it's like their little meet cute, and that's the start of this amazing romance. And it goes viral on Twitter, and Katrina totally freaks out. And so her bodyguard, Jess, is like, we're gonna go away, I'm gonna take you to my family home, kind of in the country, and we're just gonna lay low for a while, just the two of us. Which is really all they need to realize that they have both been pining for each other for quite a long time, and actually love each other very much, and want to be together. Very sweet, very soft, a little bit steamy, not like the steamiest thing I've ever read, but there were some steamy scenes and they were pretty good. I gave this 3 stars because I really loved the first half of the story, where there is like a lot of the mutual pining, the tension of like the will they, won't they, oh, are they gonna kiss now, like, oh, are they gonna realize that they love each other at this point. The tension was brilliant. It was so great. The build up before that first kiss was perfection. But basically around the 50% mark, it's like they kind of just like get together really quickly. Like as soon as they have their little like, oh yeah, we do like each other, it's like that was just it. The tension was dead. They were just together from that point on, and the kind of second half of the book just didn't really have a lot going for it, in my personal opinion. It just didn't do it for me as much as the first half did. I was very conflicted at the end of this book because I really loved the first half, didn't really love the second half. So I gave it a 3 star. I mean, I think it's pretty good, and I reckon lots of people would really like this. I especially think, like, if you're looking for romance that is smutty, but not, like, too smutty, this is really good. There's, like, a lot of focus on the relationship and not so much on, like, the sex. So I definitely would recommend this maybe if you're, like, new to romance. I think this series would be really great, but just wasn't my fave, unfortunately. But still a pretty decent read. That took a lot longer than I expected. Those are all the books that I have to talk about that I've read not for videos in this first quarter of 2021. Nothing too amazing, nothing too terrible. Well, there were a few terrible ones, I will say that. Those short stories, very hit or miss for me. Kind of hope that the second quarter of this year goes a little bit better. I haven't read many 5-star reads this year in general, which is very disappointing. So I hope I get some good 5-star reads in the second quarter, and I hope I get to talk to you guys about them in a few months. But that is it for the first quarter of 2021. Those are the books that I've been reading, and that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. As always, feel free to comment down below any books that you've been reading, any faves that you've had this year, any 5 stars, any books that you've hated and you want to rant about. Feel free to comment. I just love talking about books, so feel free. Otherwise, I really appreciate you watching this. As always, I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!